You're thinking? I called it because of you.
Oh, I gotta think still.
You gotta go because it's only 50 more.
Well, it's a lot more than 50.
I don't care, but...
Very early into the session, this is the first big blind that I post, and maybe my third hand overall. I pick up ace queen. Everyone folds to low jack, who open jams all in for $40. The action folds to me. Pretty much a blank slate right now. I have no idea whether the table leans towards aggressive, passive, tight, or loose. Facing a short stack all in from the low jack without any hand history, I think ace queen folding here is totally fine, but calling is okay as well, especially closing the action. I decide to go with the latter and flick in the call. The board runs queen 7-5 on the flop. Very happy to see that. Turn is a king, not so happy anymore. And the river is a fourth club, so any king and any club beats me now. We table our hands, and the villain shows king jack with the jack of clubs to take it down. Not a particularly great start, losing a flip. This hand, I pick up ace-6 on the button. Only the low jack limps before the action folds to me. With ace high and in position, I decide to attack the late position limper. I raise it to $15. Everyone folds except for the limper, who calls. It's heads up into a flop of 10-7 deuce with 2 clubs. The villain checks. I decide to c-bet for $10. The villain calls. The turn is a 7. The villain checks again. Board is not favoring my range nor my hand. My ace high does beat some straight draws and flush draws though. I check back to navigate to showdown. The river is another deuce, which double pairs the board. The villain checks again. Actually a great card for me. With this runout, my ace high beats a lot of draws, but as played, no sense of value betting here. Targeting king high is way too thin. I'm only getting called by better or a chop. I check back. We table our hands, and we chop the pot as the villain shows ace queen. This hand, I pick up ace king on the button. The low jack limps. The high jack raises to $12. The cutoff folds. I 3-bet to $45. The blinds fold. The low jack calls and the high jack calls. It's 3-way into a flop of queen 7-6 with 2 hearts. Both villains check. Even though I have position, I decide not to c-bet multi-way with ace king high. The queen high flop and somewhat draw heavy board will connect with the villains a lot, especially when I block ace king. I check back. The turn is a 9. The low jack checks. The high jack now bets out $85. Not much for me to do but fold. The low jack also folds. The villain then proudly shows 9-7 offsuit. Well played. This hand, I pick up ace-king of spades on the button. There is an under-the-gun straddle to $6. +1 calls. The middle position calls. The action folds to me, and I raise it to $40. Everyone folds except for the middle position, who calls. It's heads up into a flop of jack 8-5 with 2 hearts and 1 spade. The villain leads out for $60. It's a pretty big sizing, but I have some history with this player. He has a tendency of raising and c-betting wide, as well as for odd sizings. I don't think I'm necessarily behind here with ace-king high, and with position, 2 overs, and backdoor flush and straight, I call. The turn is a 3. The villain checks. I check back. The river is the 9 of hearts. The villain checks again. Not the best river card. Flush draw, which I unblock, gets there. A couple straight draws like 6-7 suited and queen 10 suited gets there, even though he's not super likely to have those. I gladly check back and take a showdown. The villain tables ace king, and we chop this pot. This hand, I pick up King Jack in the hijack position. Everyone folds to me and I open to $10. Only the big blind defends. It's heads up into a flop of Ace Ace King Rainbow. The villain checks. Pretty good flop, hits my range really hard. My king is likely in the lead as well, as the big blind will have a wide range. A c-bet will likely take it down here, as my jack also blocks straight draws, so there's not much for me to protect against. I decide that this is a good spot to balance my checking range. I check back. The turn is a queen. The villain checks again. Not the best card. A weaker king x hand will now have counterfeit me for a chop, and weaker pocket pairs will now have another overcard to be afraid of. Anyhow, I start betting for value now, targeting queen x or weaker pocket pairs. I bet $10, and the villain folds. This hand, I pick up ace queen in the big blind. There is a button straddle to $6. The small blind folds. Not quite sure about what to do in these button straddle spots. I call. Under the gun raises to $20. Everyone folds to the cutoff who calls. The button calls and the action is on me. Under the gun doesn't open raise much, so I think his range is pretty strong. I do close the action here, so I decide to call to see a flop with ace queen out of position. It's four-way into a flop of king 10-7 with two hearts. I check. Under the gun c-bets for $25. The cutoff jams all in for $160. The button folds. With this action, pretty sure my hand is not good. I let this one go. This hand, I pick up king queen in the hijack position. The middle position limps. The low jack folds. I raise it to $15 to take down the dead money or isolate. The cutoff folds. The button calls. The small blind folds. The big blind calls and the middle position also calls. So much for isolating. It's four-way into a flop of ace jack 3 rainbow. Everyone checks. The turn is a jack. Everyone checks again. The river is a 7. Everyone checks once again. I table my hand, not expecting it to be good often, but I do have the nut no pair. And surprisingly, everyone mucks, and I take this one down with king high. This hand, I pick up king jack at the cutoff. The low jack limps. I raise it to $15. Everyone folds except for the big blind and low jack, who both call. It's three-way into a flop of 10-9-6 with two clubs. Both villains check to me. Not a bad flop at all, with two overs, a gut shot, as well as backdoor to the second nut flush. I would likely be c-betting this heads up, but multi-way, I decide to check back. The turn is another 10. Both villains check again. Pretty good turn card, because the villains will less likely be trapping with a 10 now. I think this is a good spot to take a jab. Still got pretty decent equity with the two overs and gut shot. I do have a club blocker to rep a flush if that becomes necessary on the river. I bet $35, and everyone folds. This hand, I pick up ace queen on the button. Under the gun +1 limps. The low jack limps. The cutoff raises to $15. In position against limpers on a pretty light raise for the amount of limpers, I decide that this is a good spot to 3-bet squeeze. I re-raise to $45. The small blind folds. The big blind jams all in for a total of $135. Everyone folds and the action is back on me. At this point, my image is aggressive. I have been raising pre-flop most often, as well as the only one 3-betting at all. With his stack against me, I think he's jamming pretty wide. Likely pocket pairs, I'd say, so I think it's going to be a coin flip situation. With dead money plus my own money already in, I decide to flick in the call. The board runs Queen Jack 9, all clubs, 5 and 4. Just about the best run out I can ask for, Ace Queen with the Ace of Clubs. We table our hands, and I take this one down, beating pocket 10s. This hand, I pick up pocket aces in the big blind. The middle position limps. The hijack raises to $20. The action folds to me. I 3-bet to $60. Only the hijack, the initial raiser, calls. It heads up into a flop of Ace-9-4 Rainbow. What an amazing flop. Top set on the driest board ever. As great as it is to hold the absolute nuts, my spot is actually not easy to get value. As a pre-flop aggressor, I have all the aces and ace-x hands in my range. I'm double blocking top pair, and there are no draws out there. So what is the villain going to put money in the pot with? If he happens to have ace-king with the last ace, or a set of nines, then great. We coolered him, and the money's going in anyways. But that's probably wishful thinking. I have to induce him to bluff here. But if I check only to bet out or check raise on later streets, that appears way stronger. I decide to make a tiny bet at quarter pot for $30. I go with this sizing because I think it's small enough to induce a raise as a bluff if he has nothing, and also cheap enough for the villain to peel another card with pocket pairs like jacks through kings. The villain thinks for a bit and then decides to raise it up to $80. This is just awesome. Now, I'm not going to go over the top here. The villain doesn't have a lot behind, and he might appear to be stack committed. But remember, he might still be bluffing, and if I 3-bet jam on the flop, it's just going to shut it down as he's not calling off with a bluff. This is not a spot where there is a possible draw on the board and he is committed to calling a jam. I just call. The turn is a jack. At this point, it's essentially a brick, unless by some miracle he hit pocket jacks or ace jack. I check again to feed him the rope, hoping that if he's bluffing, he's going to follow through by jamming this turn. The villain does go all in, and I snap call. The river is a brick. I table my hand, and of course, the nuts is going to take it down. The villain decides to show one card, and he showed a 9. Did he have a set of 9s, ace-9, or decide to turn 9x into a bluff? Unfortunately, we will never know. I rack up pretty early because I want to beat the rush hour traffic. Results for this session: I bought in for $700 and cashed out for $930. That's a profit of $230. I do not head home though. I go to River Rock Poker Room to meet up with some friends who are chilling there. Shout out to my crew, Trevor, Mikey, and Jason. They are there to play a very interesting tournament that happens every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. It's an $80 buy-in, max 33 entrants, short stack, freeze out, meaning there are no rebuys, and only top 3 pays. I decide that I don't want to miss out on the fun, so I also buy in to join them. And I busted out, I think placing 12th. A few days later, with the crew, we go for a nice dinner at Atlas Steakhouse, and then head back to River Rock for drinks and to play cash games together. Did not vlog at River Rock, as usual, and ended up losing $120 in 1-3. This brings my total bankroll to
Oh! Jason's missing this. I know. This is what he was
show this to him later.
Yeah, Burgundy, you missed out on this, pal. Get your receipts ready. That was a good steak, boys.
That was a marvelous. Yo, what are you doing, man? Yo, Bone.